The Mind's Garden by Reuben White. The winter wind howled through the withered roses as Elena walked alone among the thorny stems, each step crunching on frost-covered gravel. Her fingers, red with cold, traced the bare branches that once bore summer's glory. Like these dormant gardens, her mind felt barren, each thought a thorn that pricked at her peace until hope's blood ran thin and cold. Every shadow that crosses my mind, she whispered to the bitter air, seems to plant itself deeper than the last. The ravens of her thoughts circled overhead, their dark wings casting moving shadows across the frozen ground. Each morning brought a fresh assault of these winged doubts, until her mind became a cage of beating wings and sharp beaks. It was then, in that darkest moment, that she noticed an elderly figure among the skeletal rose bushes. His simple robes seemed to catch what little warmth the winter sun provided, and his eyes held a depth that spoke of ancient wisdom. "Child," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of summer even in winter's grip, "why do you walk alone in these gardens of your troubled thoughts?" Elena turned to him, her eyes rimmed with frost-like tears. "My mind, good sir, has become a maze from which I cannot escape. Each path leads only to darker corridors, and peace seems as distant as spring's first bloom." The sage stepped closer, his presence somehow making the bitter wind less cutting. "Consider this truth," he said, gesturing to the dormant garden around them. "As these roses sleep beneath winter's blanket, waiting for their moment to bloom again, so too do brighter thoughts lie dormant within you. We are gardeners of our own minds, Elena. The thoughts we tend are the flowers that will bloom." That night, in her chamber, Elena sat before her mirror, the sage's words echoing in her mind like distant bells. The reflection that gazed back at her seemed different somehow, not just a face, but a garden waiting to be tended. As she pondered this, a strange luminescence filled the room, and a figure dressed in dawn's light appeared beside her. "I am Hope," the figure said, its voice like morning dew on fresh petals. "And you, dear Elena, are standing at the threshold of transformation." "But how?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "How does one transform a garden choked with weeds of doubt?" Hope smiled, and the room grew warmer. "Begin with a single thought, as dawn begins with a single ray of light. Plant it carefully, water it with belief, and watch it grow." Days passed, and Elena began to tend her mind's garden with new care. Each morning, she would walk among the real roses, now showing hints of spring's return, and with each step, she would plant a seed of gentler thought. Where once she might have cursed the thorns that scratched her, she began to appreciate their protection of the delicate blooms to come. As the season turned, a third figure appeared in her garden, Truth, wearing a crown woven of both flowers and thorns. "You begin to understand," Truth said, watching Elena tend to new growth with careful hands. "Thoughts, like the wind, travel far beyond these garden walls. The seeds you plant here will scatter far and wide, taking root in places you may never see." Elena looked up from a particularly promising rosebud. "I understand now," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in winters past. "Each kind thought I offer myself is like planting a flower that will bloom not just for me, but for all who pass through this garden." The transformation was not immediate, nor was it without setbacks. Some days, the ravens would return, their shadows darker than before. But Elena had learned to see them differently, not as harbingers of despair, but as reminders to tend her garden more carefully. She learned that even the darkest thoughts, like composted leaves, could be transformed into nourishment for new growth. As spring fully awakened, the garden burst into unprecedented bloom. Roses of every color reached toward the sun, their petals carrying the morning dew like precious gems. Elena walked among them, her steps now sure and purposeful. Where once she had seen only thorns and withered hopes, she now saw the endless cycle of growth, death, and rebirth that marked both gardens and minds. "We are what our thoughts have made us," she would say to those who came seeking the secret of her garden's beauty. "Each thought we nurture shapes the landscape of our tomorrow." Tend your mind's garden with care, for its flowers will bloom not just in your own heart, but in the hearts of all whose lives you touch. And so Elena's garden became known throughout the land, not just for its roses, but for the wisdom that bloomed there. People would come from far and wide, carrying their own withered thoughts, and leave with seeds of hope planted in their hearts. For she had learned the deepest truth of all, that the mind's garden, when tended with love and wisdom, could bloom even in the deepest winter. In time, even the ravens became welcome visitors, for Elena had learned that a truly resilient garden needs both sunshine and shadow, both flowers and thorns. She had become not just a gardener of roses, but a keeper of that most precious and powerful of gardens, the endless flowering of the mind.